Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay,
Thank you
let me
very
go ahead
much.
and start. Hey, not a problem. Let me go ahead and kind of give you a little background. Since 1990 till current, I have studied serial predation, serial deviant psychology, both in criminal, well, actually, I shouldn't say both in criminal, but in criminal, violent, and non-violent offenders, victimology, and basically what attracts predators to victims. During that time, John Douglas and Robert Ressler were the original founders of the behavioral science unit at the FBI. John Douglas was one of my mentors. I was planning on becoming a profiler, and I went in the military instead. So, what questions do you have?
And you keep the starting in the military about in that field, or you when you went there, kind of you deviate from that?
Went a completely different direction. Basically, in the military, I went for supply. Profiling is not as easy as people. Well, I think a lot of people, if they use common sense, realize profiling is not as easy as they think. But in order to be a
go ahead. Glamorous and easy in the movies. That's why.
Well, burnout is extremely high. Your emotional response to it's damaging. I mean, there's just no way around it. You cannot deal with what you deal with and still come out normal and healthy as people think. But going to your question about the death penalty, one of the things I finally realized after interviewing multiple predators, and the three top ones that I mentioned, there was two serial rapists, one of which was international. He had 32 victims. The second one was a state boy, and he had 12 to 13 that were known. I think he had plenty more than that, but it was 12 to 13 he was convicted of. And then there was a serial killer that actually made a little blip on the news for a short period of time. He had 5 known victims, all hookers, prostitutes, sorry, it's TikTok, it's prostitutes. And
yes.
When interviewing them, I came to a realization and conclusion about our justice system. And not just with them, but with a lot of the other things that I interviewed. The death penalty itself is not about revenge, like a lot of those who are anti-death penalty think. And it's not about justice, like those who are pro-death penalty think. It's basically like removing a cancer from the body. It's not going to stop another individual from acting out or doing a crime. It's not going to be a detractant. You know, you can't go to a serial killer and say, hey, don't kill, because if you do, you might end up with a death penalty. They don't care. Serial criminals do not care.
Kind of a compulsion to them, right? They cannot stop. Usually they have to be stopped.
That's a premise that it's in layman's terms, yeah. What they're doing is hardwired. The basic survival instinct and sexual instinct that is inherent in humankind is hardwired. Fantasy is hardwired. I cannot tell you, okay, question for you, and you don't have to get very specific about this, but question, what do you find appealing in a generic sense? Is it tall women, short women, tall men, short men? You don't have to answer. I'm saying you can think about that. And for anybody who's listening, you think about what you find appealing. Now, I'm going to tell you that I'm going to train you and I'm going to counsel you into just being appealed by the opposite of what you think it is. If you like tall women, you are now, when I'm done, going to like short men. You just can't do it. And when it comes to serial criminals, and that's a topic that could take all night on things, but the specific ones we're talking about, and those that normally end up with the death penalty, they are hardwired for what they want, and you can't change it. They go through cycles of depression, fantasy, exhilaration, and then disappointment, and then they go back into depression. You just can't change it. So it's removing a cancer.
And each individual is different, like, because there's some serial killers, they manage to stop for a time, and it's like they're not going to do it again, and then something happens and then they're back at it. Some of them they manage to
I don't believe any serial killer ever stops. I do not believe any serial killer ever stops. The cool-off parties, the cool-off periods can get long or short, but they are still in some form or another in that cycle. Let's say that they're going 2-3 years without actually taking a life or taking a victim. And the reason I say that is because 90% of your serial predators out there do not kill. They do not unalive. 90% of your predators out there are actually leaving living victims, but they're scarred traumatically with whatever the crime is, be it theft, be it raping, be it emotional sabotage or abuse. Serial predation can come in forms of those who have ongoing relationships with individuals to continue to victimize them. But most of your predators do not unalive their victims, because the actual unaliving is not what does it for them. As a matter of fact, if they could get away with keeping the individual alive for an extended period of time, then that would actually benefit them more, because they can continue the fantasy. So the cooling off period that people talk about, they say, oh, well, he hasn't done this crime for 10 years. No, he hasn't been caught for 10 years. He or she has. Yeah.
else. Yes.
Shermanator, that's a good statement about the chemical castration. Chemical castration actually causes a more violent response. No matter what, they're going to have the fantasy in their head. And what happens with chemical castration is that you have taken away the physical response that they're able to use. So they will, how do I put this so TikTok doesn't ban you? They will use alternate means to get the satisfaction for that fantasy. So it actually can exacerbate the situation.
Yeah, might be worse in that case now.
Correct. But yeah, I'm in favor of the death penalty only because what you're doing is you're eliminating, first off, you're eliminating a massive cost and drain on society when it comes to your psychological, when it comes to your financial, because while they're on death row, it does cost quite a bit of money. Because you're talking about the legal system still doing their process, which can be expensive. The housing can be expensive. The transportation of said individuals can be expensive. You're also eliminating the glorification of said individual for those who may, in some twisted way, want to be and emulate them. And finally, once more, it's a cancer. It's not going to be a deterrent for others, but it is a cancer. You're removing a cancer. You don't let a cancer grow in your body simply because it's advancing in stages. You remove it so you go ahead and have a healthier body. Removing a predator and terminating their position in life, you're removing a cancer.
Do you think that at this point in time, there's more or less serial killers out there? Like in the 80s and the 90s, there was it's like every week there was one different. Now you can barely hear about it.
Here's the thing, that it has not decreased. As a matter of fact, on average, the FBI on average believes that in any area within a tri-state area, you have 135 active serial predators when it comes to killers.
That's a recent estimate.
Well, the thing is that they may not have actually terminated lives at this point, but they're active. They're hunting, they're stalking, they're preparing, they're in the fantasy stage. But there is on an average about 135 that are active within a tri-state area of any given time here in the United States alone. So, and that's a healthy estimate. It's probably far higher, and the more we numb society emotionally, the higher that's going to get. We are now seeing, I don't think that there's more. I think what there is that we're just, number one, we're seeing more visually what's going on. You can't go anywhere without somebody having a camera, without somebody having, you know, an upload to Snapchat, TikTok. For instance,
there's gotta be some kind of deterrent, knowing that everywhere there's a camera, they can get caught like faster than before. Before it was a little more difficult.
Nope. They don't care. Most of these individuals, okay, I actually wrote a paper on this. There are, and I'm going to make this very, very simple. What I'm about to tell you is not by any means textbook when it comes to dealing with deviant psychology, but it's very basic for a layman to understand. There are a total of 5 different type of what you would call serial terminators. Let's go ahead and use that word so that we don't get flagged. So the first type is the one that a lot of people know about, the Ted Bundys. Okay, those are highly functioning, highly intelligent, highly organized predators. And these are the ones that you have the movies about, where they stalk and they hunt their prey. They have a very specific agenda on what they're going to do. They have a very specific agenda of how they're going to handle the capture, the execution, and then the disposal. They're not as prolific, or they're not as common as a lot of people think, but they are, you know, they're out there. And these are the ones that will have absolutely no problem being in a crowded area, looking around, seeing people and grinning, because they can say, I can reach out and touch you, and it's an ego trip. The second type is an unorganized, low functioning entity. And these are the ones like your Vampire Sacramento, for instance. These are the ones that are local. They normally cannot hold a job. They normally cannot function very well in society itself. Oftentimes there is some type of mental integer that goes into this. They have schizophrenia, or, you know, they have some other brain trauma is a huge, huge part of this. They normally are local. They're normally short bursts of violence, and they normally don't hunt. It's spur of the moment. Let's see here. Richard Speck is a prime example. Many of the younger generation don't know who he is, but many of the older generations do. Richard Speck was the individual who terminated 13 nurses one night, and the 14th was hiding under her bed in their dorm room. He had just broken in, decided what he wanted to do. He left, and then when he was bleeding, he went to a hospital and they were treating him as he was arrested, because the nurse had managed to describe him. So he wasn't thinking. He would see a camera and he'd be like, he wouldn't care. Matter of fact, he may even flash a peace symbol, because it's not connecting in his head that camera is going to be used to put him away. The third type you have is a zealot. There is a reason why they're doing what they're doing. These are the ones that target homeless, prostitutes. There's normally a religious fanaticism behind them, and it's not just Christian. A lot of people think Christian, but it's not just Christian. There are other zealots that do this. But theirs is a mission. They're cleaning the world of filth, vermin, et cetera, et cetera. You know, there's something behind in their mentality that says that they are doing a righteous work.
With a religious aspect in their mind, or something like that.
Yeah,
like they think they're cleaning the streets, something to that effect.
Yeah. Hey, just a second. I'm looking at I'm sorry. I was going off my tangent. You are right, Rock Cutler. I was not paying attention. When it comes to your comments, I do apologize for that. I'm going to make a little quick comment, and I'll get back to the different types. The death penalty is in of itself not supposed to be a deterrent, guys. You are correct. It's a decade situation where it wastes a lot of our money, appeal after appeal after appeal. But the reason we do that is because the entity still sitting on death row is still a human being, still has a social security number, still is considered to be a living, breathing human being. And society as a whole, once you are born and once you have established separate sentient occupancy is a prime way of saying it. We take taking of that life very seriously. So unfortunately, the way that our system is set up, our system is not set up for justice. Our system has never been set up for justice. Our system has been set up for a process. The process is supposed to take place. The steps are supposed to be met. And if the steps all take place and the process has been met, this is why we call it due process, then we can, at the end of that process, determine legally what we need to do. And with death penalty, unfortunately, from in my personal opinion, unfortunately, it does take decades. So you are correct. So going back to what we were talking about, okay, so you have your crusaders, or your individuals who have a higher purpose, is what they will say. And if you read up, you can actually Google these terms, and you can actually Google this, and you'll find them quite fascinating. God told me, an angel told me. I was, because of my teachings, I knew that this had to be done. You have your assassin. Now, an assassin's different from the first three, and the reason being is because an assassin does not have a sexual or emotional satisfaction to what they're doing. Oftentimes, assassins are tied to money, or they're tied to some type of benefits. Dorothy Puentes from Sacramento is a prime example. She was a individual who were taking in homeless, lower IQ or mentally disadvantaged individuals in Sacramento, California, and they stopped showing up at the soup kitchens. They stopped showing up on the corners, but their paychecks, their welfare checks, and their Social Security checks continued to flow. It wasn't for it was several years before she was actually caught, and she was convicted of unaliving all these individuals and taking their Social Security checks. So, that's called an assassin. She's not doing it for a sexual gratification or for a emotional support. She's doing it simply for the money. Some of the more famous would be in Hollywood, the ideology, they idolize would be your assassins, your mob members. Hey, get Guido to take care of it. Okay, Guido happens to have a certain mentality that allows him to be an assassin. Some other assassins that you also hear about often, and I get a lot of hate for this. Before I say what I'm about to say, I am an Army veteran. I've served in the military 17 years. I love my country. There is absolutely no way that I will ever have anybody be able to tell me I do not. But there are certain individuals that gravitate towards war, that gravitate towards conflict, because they can, in fact, use a special set of skills to make money. And every country has them out there. And finally, what you have is your this is one that is very controversial, before I say it, and the reason being is because I actually used to argue with John Douglas about this. Guys, when I say that he was my mentor, I don't say that like we were eating Christmas dinner together, okay? I was one of thousands that he was mentoring who wanted to become profilers back in the 80s and 90s. He was Robert Ressler and John Douglas were the founders of the Behavioral Science Unit. But what he did is he went online. He says, hey, if you have questions or if you're interested, talk to me. I'll be more than happy to work with you. I'll be more than happy to help you, point you in the right direction of what you need to do, because it wasn't an organized organization yet in the government. But him and I used to argue about this last type, because I firmly believe in it, and many psychologists do not. But I believe in the fifth type of predator, if you will, which is the pleaser. And what I mean is that the pleaser is an individual that does what they do, whether it is raping, whether it is serial robbery, whether it is unaliving individuals, termination, because they in their mind actually believe that they are pleasing some portion of society. Mom, a teacher, a sister, normally it's a female figure, They are doing it because the most famous one that you can think of in movies would be from Psycho. The gentleman in Psycho would be the pleaser, because the reason he was unaliving the women were because his mother had raised him in such a screwed up environment that if he felt any type of sexual urge towards a woman, that he had to purge that urge immediately, or else he would not be a fit son for his mother. And most profilers and others would lump those individuals with the first type or the second type, which were the highly functioning or low functioning. I do not. I think they're actually entities who have a very different mindset. But the bottom line when it comes to all of those, death penalty would work on every single one of them. And it would not detract the next one coming down the pipe. But at the same time, what it would do is it would stop that individual from ever doing it again. Any questions?
Well, I suppose by what you're saying, it's not going to be a deterrent, but that's what they basically let us believe. Sorry, let us believe that it's done for some sense of justice or deterrent, but it has that logic. Is kind of a mechanic transactional way of taking care of these people that they cannot be in society, and being in prison is a huge expense.
There are pros and cons to it, and there's actual debates on both sides. There are some who actually say that it's cheaper to keep them in prison for life, because there is a massive amount of expense that goes with putting an individual on death row and then getting them to a place where we can actually carry out the sentence. There is a huge drain on our budget when it comes to that. There really is. Primarily because of the legal side of it that has to go into that. There is massive amount of paperwork that's filed. Most of these individuals are considered indigent, so they don't pay for their lawyer. We do. The automatic appeal of any any death penalty case is extremely time consuming, and the paperwork that goes into it that has to be re-looked at is just huge. It's almost insurmountable. So yeah, the cost basis of having an individual on death row is fairly significant.
Well,
it would almost be cheaper. Go ahead.
Here in the state of Florida, the estimate that we have is $3.2 million per individual.
And that is without taking into consideration inflation, or without taking into consideration, that's just textbook. And what I mean by that is that every case is different.
Yeah,
what if they have a medical condition? What if they have a medical condition that they have to go ahead and be treated for on an ongoing basis? What if they're what I call a flurry, reporter? Basically, they're an individual who turns around, and every time you turn around, they're filing a new motion, a religious motion, a personal motion, this type of thing. The bottom line is that it's huge, and it could be upwards of 5 million to be with a healthy estimate. But at the same time, that to shorten that, okay, first off, before DNA became a commonality in investigations, I would not have been for the death penalty, because there was a large percentage, between 5 and 7% of those sitting on death row, who actually were innocent. And while that doesn't sound like a lot, that's still, I mean, if you think about it, there's not a lot of people actually sitting on death row anytime. 5 to 7% is still, 4 to 5 individuals who we executed annually who were innocent. So before DNA, go ahead.
No, I'm agreeing with you. Like, it's incredible. Killing an innocent person, that's unthinkable.
Correct. But since DNA, and since they have made the requirements in order to get a death penalty as detailed and as overwhelming as they have. You cannot get a death penalty is not just handed out. A death penalty has to go through several processes above beyond your standard time sentencing that you get. So in order when an individual gets a death penalty, it's pretty extraneous, for the process to go through, and then it's an automatic appeal. They have to take every single integer that went into that case, and they have to cross-examine it to make sure that that due process was handled. Now, you notice I'm still not using the term justice, because we're not going for justice. We're not going for revenge. This is not the victim versus the criminal. Matter of fact, the victim is removed from the process and the state is put in. That's why you hear Welcher versus New Mexico, Smith versus New York, Bundy versus Washington. It's because the victim has been removed. Correct. What happens is that we are doing a due process now, and it's not about the victim anymore. The crime against the victim is brought in, the victim's name is brought in, but the actual sentencing for the criminal is against the state. So, but an automatic appeal is done, and then after that, every little thing they might want to appeal. I've seen appeals of evidence because there was one case that I was studying, a textbook case. It was the Hillside Stranglers. There were two, Bianchi and Bueno, who were cousins. And one of the appeals that took 3-4 months to process was because Anthony Bueno was saying that he should have been separate from his cousin for one of the crimes because he had worked overtime. So they had to literally go back through that entire, just the one case out of all the multiple victims, and they had to go through all the testimony of that and all of the evidence for that one case, and once more prove that even though he had overtime in his own shop, because as an owner you don't clock your overtime, obviously, that he was actually there and he had the potential as well as the capability of being part of that particular case. And once more, I'm trying to be very careful. I'd be a lot more free of my speech if I was doing one of my speeches, like when I'm doing for education. But here on TikTok, we have to be very careful.
Yeah.
But yeah. So basically, what would happen is that you wouldn't have any more. Justice or anything else for the victims once it goes to trial. It's now a due process. So.
I don't want to forget to tell you thank you very much for your service.
Sure.
Thank you for your time. Hopefully we stay connected and I can
Sure.
use your expertise and knowledge in any other of the live that I'm going to be doing. That way we can keep chatting and maybe get some different opinions from more people.
I would love to, and I have no problem debating the tough stuff when it comes to justice. If anytime anybody wants to, if they want, they could go ahead and hit me up, and I'll be more than happy to go ahead and debate it, pros and cons. I actually debated with Washington State's Congress about 3 decades ago, 2 decades. I'm aging myself, I know, but it was about 2 decades ago. I actually was debated with them about the death penalty when it came to them removing it from the books in Washington State, and I used Washington happens to be one of the corners of the bloody triangle. Washington, Utah, and California. That's for another time. But I actually used several prolific cases that I researched and studied for my education to argue keeping the death penalty on.
That's another thing. Like I know some of those cases that yours had studied. They're not common knowledge, and that would be really, really cool to talk about those one that you can talk about.
Oh, sure.
To hear for some of those cases that no one else ever heard. Like that would be really, I would say, really cool.
Yeah, there's actually the ones that people hear about. To be honest, it's not because of how gory or how high, the reason they're high profile is not actually about the case itself. There were two cases, and I'll bring up one here. There were two cases I actually researched. One I actually assisted on. That, and when I say that, we'll take Hollywood out of this, all right? During the time frame before the behavioral science unit became prevalent, and before every law enforcement agency out there had a criminologist or a profiler, if you will, quote unquote, on staff, they used a lot of amateurs. They still do to this day, but they use a lot of amateurs to go ahead and assist in a lot of these cases pro bono, because there were oftentimes ideas that individuals would get in a growing field that they found would work, that they hadn't thought about because they hadn't been trained to. Up until the 70s, you weren't trained to look for a serial killer. You weren't trained to look for a serial rapist. You were trained to look for one criminal, and you may find out that there was multiple victims, but it wasn't considered to be, a chain of events. And even though we had them, it just wasn't accepted or understood in the criminal, the criminal process. Once the behavioral science unit was established, a good example, BTK, Zodiac, Ted Bundy, Richard Speck, a couple of high-profile cases, they had a lot of amateurs who were helping out and sending in suggestions or sending in what they considered to be a profile of that individual before the term was popular. Robert Douglas was actually the one who made it popular. But what happened with that is that some of the cases that really should have made the news didn't, because it just wasn't picked up. One of the cases in question I'm talking about was one where the individual, one of the signatures they used, and that's once more a talk for a complete. I could do a live panel if you ever were interested on the different types, but his signature, when they would find their victims' remains, the signature was fur of some sort. Oftentimes it was like rabbit, or there was cat, there was fur of some sort left at the crime scene. And originally they thought that it was, he was a furrier, he was a taxidermist, somebody who had something to do with it. And when he was finally caught, it turned out that it was just simple. He thought fur was soft and pretty, and he felt that his victims deserved it. So he left fur. And we actually called, I can't use a term here because it would tick off a lot of TikTokers in that arena. But let's just say that there's a particular term that's out there that was used.
I know what you're referring to. But
the thing is that we, there was a swatch of fur that was left at each one. I thought it was fascinating. The other one, when we finally did find it, I believe that he should have been high profile because he was very prolific. He had a huge amount of victims. And the reason I thought that he should have been more high profile is because he was actually attached to the schools. He was actually attached to a school district in California, and he was a janitor. And the only reason he didn't get high profile is because at the same time that he was actually tracked, caught, and convicted, they had the Atlantic child killers going. And Adam Walsh was one of the victims, which was Jim Walsh, his son. So I think that's the only reason he did not get the higher profile. But there are some cases out there that never made it out in the news that I think would have been far more interesting than the ones that did.
Well, I'm going to reach out to you. That way we can, I don't know, one of these days that you have a few minutes, we can get one of those cases. That one, the janitor killer, sounds interesting.
Sure.
And yeah, we'll love to pick your brain on that and get people learning. Bree, thank you very much. It was a great experience for me to get you here.
Okay. No, it's a great. I love talking about this stuff. I know that sounds weird. I love talking about it though. So yeah, anytime. All right, guys. Yeah, Tyrone, I do believe it. I do believe it is necessary. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and go.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Appreciate it. You have a great night, and hopefully we talk soon again.
You got it. Talk to you later.
Okay. Take care. My friends, that was awesome. That was great. And we're going to try to see if we can work with her to do a series to see if we get some of those cases that nobody known about for one or other reason. But I'm gonna end the live in a high note. I'm gonna end it right now, and I will see you guys or hear from you guys tomorrow. Have a great night, and remember to follow to stay connected. We post every day, and we will be doing interesting lives about death penalty and basically serial killers, but those you maybe haven't heard. Have a good night. Bye.